ABC News World Headquarters in New York. This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. It is difficult to make the presidential war in Florida easy to understand because it's so complex. It may be a civics lesson, but it's also a circus. Today, Florida Supreme Court said it will not intervene to stop counting any ballots by hand. And tonight, in those largely Democratic areas, counting has either continued or is about to start. And it's not the end of it. There's no guarantee that any of this recounting will ultimately have any legal standing. As the Wall Street Journal said today, there's a legal hurricane in Florida. George W. Bush is still officially 300 votes ahead of Mr. Gore. But just a few minutes ago, there was a public challenge for Mr. Gore. The vice president came out to make an intricate, complicated proposal for how he thinks the election could be resolved. So we're going to go to his residence in Washington and ABC's Terry Moran. Terry.
Well, Peter, here's the proposal that Al Gore just made. He said, allow these hand counts that are underway tonight to continue and be completed, and allow the absentee ballots from overseas to be counted as well. And he said that should determine the election. He also said two things that the American people have been waiting for someone to say. He said he would drop lawsuits, and he said he wanted to meet with Governor Bush. Here's how he put that.
I will abide by the result. I will take no legal action to challenge the result, and I will not support any legal action to challenge the result. I am also prepared, if Governor Bush prefers, to include in this recount all the counties in the entire state of Florida. I propose that Governor Bush and I meet personally, one-on-one, as soon as possible before the vote count is finished, not to negotiate, but to improve the tone of our dialogue in America.
And so, armed with a few court victories, including that Florida Supreme Court ruling that have allowed these manual recounts to continue, Al Gore is saying, let those votes come in, let the absentee ballots come in, that'll be it.
Thanks very much, Terry Moran. Outside the Vice President's residence in Washington tonight, there's a tendency to think, if you'd heard the Vice President in full earlier on, that he's cut right through all of this. But George Stephanopoulos, our political analyst, I think will say it's very complex.
He's woven his way through. That's exactly right. He's put in a lot of poison pills in that proposal that he knows the Bush campaign cannot accept. He knows they cannot accept, including Dade County.
Explain that, why?
Because Dade County is a heavily Democratic county in the south of Florida that has already voted not to do a full county recount. They don't want that cache of votes.
So in some respects, Mr. Gore is putting pressure on Dade to get involved where it hadn't wanted to.
To change their minds and supporting his own legal position, which is suing them to open up the county to a full recount. Secondly, he proposed opening up the whole state to a recount. Sounds very reasonable. Some would say it is very reasonable. The Bush campaign, James Baker, has already called that proposal crazy, but they'll be coming under more pressure to accept that.
I've always wondered why the Bush campaign didn't want to open up some of those other counties. It's in part, I gather, because it would have given legality to the counts going on in the Democratic counties.
Number one, and secondly, it's uncertainty. Right now, they're ahead by 300 votes. They don't want to throw in any uncertainty into the mix. Finally, Peter, there's the proposal that sounds so commonsensical and so reasonable. Why don't the two of them just get together and meet? It sounds easy. I think that's going to be very hard for Governor Bush to do.
I apologize. The American people clearly are looking for this to end and like the notion of two men resolving this in an apparently civilized fashion.
And that's going to put tremendous pressure on Governor Bush to accept that meeting.
There's one more thing. There's risk here for Mr. Gore.
There is risk for Mr. Gore. Even though they hope that there are the votes there in Broward County and Palm Beach County, there's no guarantee that actually when these votes are counted, Gore will go over the top.
And do you want to try to anticipate Mr. Bush's reaction at the moment, or at least what's going on inside the Bush campaign?
What we know for sure is that the Bush High Command is meeting behind closed doors now to come up with a proposal. Someone will have to make a response. I think that they will have to at least have a counter proposal for some sort of meeting, even as they try to poke holes in his request for recounts.
And there's one other thing. This, in some respects, rises over the whole Florida process. And Florida election law, the Secretary of State in Florida finds all of these Democratic challenges not appropriate. So what's likely to happen there?
Well, there still is another legal challenge tomorrow. The Florida State Supreme Court is going into meeting tomorrow to decide whether they support the Secretary of State's view on recounts, which is that they should happen only when the machines are broken, or the Attorney General's view, which means they should happen whenever there are enough challenge votes in play to change the outcome of the race.
Many thanks, George Stephanopoulos, our political analyst. So, why does the country exasperated to some extent with all these goings-on? You'll see a little bit of this when we take it right down to the county level, because it is there where the most partisan political momentum is, in the largely Democratic counties, where the Democrats believe, as George just said, that every new recounting of the ballots finds more votes for Mr. Gore. Palm Beach County, which is up the east coast from Miami, has been a cauldron, and ABC's Jackie Judd is there this evening. Jackie.
That's right, Peter. The politics of this struggle were on display even more than usual today here in Palm Beach County.
Republicans zeroed in on Carol Roberts, the Canvass Commissioner and prominent local Democrat who has been pushing hard for a manual recount.
The chair at this time will recognize Mr. Carroll.
A Republican lawyer came armed with a list of grievances.
She has been observed bending, twisting, poking, and purposefully manipulating ballots in a manner that compromised their integrity.
Carroll demanded Roberts be disqualified. That was quickly shot down.
This motion is the most ridiculous, frivolous attempt that I've ever seen.
All right, thank you. Then this board will take no action on the request filed.
But Republicans had made their point to undermine Roberts' credibility in a very public forum.
Who are the attorneys representing the motion?
Democrats used a county court here to their advantage today. Lawyers argued that when and if the manual recount resumes, the board must count ballots with punch holes or chads that are indented or pierced but still attached.
The little chad didn't come off. The canvassing board takes the position that they shouldn't vote, that their vote should not count.
The goal here is to get more votes for Gore in heavily Democratic Palm Beach County if the ballots are more broadly interpreted. The judge ruled the contested ballots must be considered. Score one for the Democrats.
They seem to pick and choose their situations.
Outside the courthouse, a lawyer who has sued for a new election illustrated the raw politics involved here. He said if Gore moves ahead in the vote, many legal claims would be dropped.
The indirect effect of this litigation is, I guess, to get Al Gore elected.
Now, Peter, that may sound obvious that each side wants to get its man elected, but it is something that you do not hear said very much out loud as the rationale for so many of these lawsuits.
Jackie, I know it's unfair to ask you a question seeking a speculative answer, but having heard the vice president and knowing all of the players in Palm Beach County today, Democrat and Republican, how do you think this will go down?
Well, I think that the officials here are at the point of whoever breaks this stalemate, they will be happy. There is a great amount of impatience here, Peter. They wanted to start this county-wide hand count yesterday morning at 7 a.m. It still has not begun. It will not begin now until mid-afternoon tomorrow at the earliest. And they've told us it will take 6 days once it begins. That takes us to next Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. A lot of impatience.
Many thanks, Jackie Judd. Now go to Tallahassee, where ABC's Aaron Hayes is standing by. Aaron, one of the things that is still out there is this federal suit, which the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta today, responsible for Georgia, Alabama, Florida, picked up and said it would judge. Can you explain its status and what you think, which is unfair of me, might happen to it now? Hold it. Aaron, I can't hear you quite. Haven't got your mic open. Go ahead.
As you understand, the Bush camp does not like the thought of having to certify, put the stamp of approval on this manual recount. They don't like it. They don't trust it. As they say, it's been selective and subject to mischief. They want this question heard. It's scheduled tomorrow to begin at 7 o'clock. Briefs will be filed. The justices will hear briefs, take briefs in the morning from the Bush camp. And those justices, by the way, are all appointed by, the justices, I'm having a very difficult time.
I'll tell you why. We're confusing you in your ears.
It will begin at 7 o'clock tomorrow, right. Peter.
Fine.
And this is the Federal Appeals Court. This is where the Bush camp now has its greatest hope to get what they want, an end to that manual recount.
Okay, I apologize. I think people were confusing you by talking in your ear at the same time. At any rate, one thing we do know, James Baker, the former Secretary of State, said it the other day, once the lawyers are in business, kind of hard to slow things down. When we come back, a legion of lawyers. We actually have two serious proposals to end the election process in Florida on the table. One made yesterday by the former Secretary of State, James Baker talking for the Gore campaign about bringing this recounting to an end and counting the ballots, and then that one from Mr. Gore tonight, which seemed much more complex, but we'll have to work that one through. What if it doesn't end with this and the lawyers stay involved? Here's a possibility. John Martin takes a closer look.
If the legal fighting over Florida's votes is not resolved when the Electoral College meets to vote in December, what then?
I'm sure there's some act that will let the president stay in place until a new president is elected.
The Electoral College might vote without Florida. As it is, Governor Bush has 246 electoral votes, Vice President Gore 255. So Mr. Gore could win without Florida.
I think he's going to end up getting it. I think he's whining, complain enough that he's going to end up getting it in the end.
But that's not at all certain. So we asked Yale professor Akhil Amar, who teaches constitutional law, what is certain. He was not very reassuring.
The worst drafted provisions of the Constitution are those dealing with presidential election.
Electors from 26 states need not vote the way their states voted, and there's no penalty, or not much of one, in the other states, so they can vote however they choose.
Hopefully it will end at some point, but I'm glad that they're taking their time.
But how much time? The Electoral College meets December 18th. Even if Bush wins Florida and Gore keeps his lead in other states, Bush could still lose the Electoral College if just 3 electors switch to Gore. Then the tally would be Gore 270, Bush 268. If 2 of Bush's electors switch to Gore, it would create a tie, 269 to 269. What then? Congress would meet on January 6th to decide. Each state gets 1 vote. The House chooses the president, the Senate the vice president.
It's unlikely that the House of Representatives would be deadlocked, but if it were deadlocked and the Senate were deadlocked, then heaven help us.
If the House deadlocks, the Republican Speaker Dennis Hastert of Illinois takes office as president on January 20th. If not Hastert, next in line, Republican Senate President Pro Tem Strom Thurmond of South Carolina.
52 years ago, he ran for president and lost, but in the science fiction world, it's possible that he'd be there only in America.
So, of course, an Irish visitor had a suggestion.
It'd be much better to put Clinton back in and give him another term.
Sorry, the 22nd Amendment won't allow that. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
Well, President Clinton, as we said, is overseas. When we return,